Okay, so after we did Night of the Creeps and Slither, this is our second sort of outing into this whole thing of it's not quite the versus thing we've always done, it's more of the just coming to love two movies, working together as one unit that go together, kind of like the old-fashioned double features of like drive-ins and stuff like that would have way back in the day. And I feel like this is particularly pretty perfect for this kind of thing. I was just talking to Owen, who runs the channel, and was saying, like, I kind of can't believe we didn't do this one already. Like, it's weird that it took this long to talk about either one of these, but especially Re-Animator on this channel. Like, I had to keep reminding myself and going back, like, are we sure we haven't talked about Re-Animator yet? And no, I don't believe we have, so that's what we're going to do now. I will say, though, before we go into it, since we're talking about Re-Animator and From Beyond, and typically I'll bring up, source material or novels or short stories or novellas or whatever it may be when talking about their movie adaptations, but the thing about Lovecraft is I'm really not well read or well versed in Lovecraft, so this is really only going to be strictly a movie conversation. I wouldn't know how they compare to the source material or whatever, so that I wish I could throw that in, but I'm not quite there yet. I haven't explored that far yet, so but there's still, I feel like, plenty to say about the movies and where I'm coming from as far as how I particularly view them. So, to go into this, I guess one thing I just want to point out right away is Stuart Gordon being the director of both of them, and Jeffrey Combs and Barbara Crampton being here, and same crew. Brian Usna, the producer, who I think is mainly known not just for being the producer of these, but the director of Society is where I first really his name stuck with me. And it's like I feel like I have to remember who this guy is after he made this. So talking about stuff particularly of this era, like in this mid to late '80s era, where movies like this kind of had their own sort of sandbox they were playing in, and you look at just to put it, simply, the gory territory that we're in here, and what I love about these, and the fact that Gordon kind of assembled them all in this same place with the same crew, where it was like him kind of trying to evoke how he worked with people on the stage is what he was doing by keeping the actors and the crew in the same author source material and all that. But looking at it from this point of view of these gory movies having their own place at this particular time, is you look at gore in movies today and how it can be really excessive. We've talked extensively about that post-Saw Hostel area in the mid-2000s where torture porn kind of took over, and now we're kind of in this post-Terrifier era, in this current Terrifier era, where it's all back to this practical gore and how far you can take it, how over the top you can take it, how you can top how are you going to top yourselves doing as creatively gory stuff as possible, and what the next step of that is going to be. How much farther over the edge can you go with it? And a lot of people will wonder where the appeal is in that. People, maybe possibly more sane people or whatever, will wonder where is the entertainment value in this. Because you can also talk about that with the the slasher genre and how it was really taking off in the late '70s and throughout the '80s, and how it seemed so simple. It was just literally watching people die in fake over-the-top ways is what people went to the movies for, and how a lot of people thought that was genuinely an insane thing to do. And it's not, unbelievable that somebody would think that. All of this to say, I feel like if you wanted to convince somebody that over-the-top campiness and gore can be fun, can be an actual fun experience while also grossing you out, I feel like there's no better example of how that's possible than sitting them in front of Stuart Gordon's Lovecraft movies, particularly these two, because one defense I've always had is when you look at something that's extremely gory and extremely over the top, and it's practical, especially in this era when CGI wasn't really a thing much at all, you have somebody had to make that. Like that thing that's giving you that visceral reaction to what you're seeing, whether it be like, somebody's eye coming out or somebody getting decapitated or somebody's intestine coming out or whatever it is. It's like, if that looked bad enough, nobody would react to it. It would be ridiculous. But like I said, there's an artistry in having to make that stuff to get that kind of reaction out of an audience, whether it's something that looks relatively real or something that is so over the top and clearly fake looking, but still just close enough and just gross enough to get that reaction. And that's something that takes an awful lot of talent in itself. Now, you can come back and say, like, it doesn't do much for the story of movies. Like if you look at, a slasher franchise, story-wise, there's not going to be a whole lot there, of course. I mean, every now and then, we've talked about how there can be, like, some surprisingly rich character work every now and then and something like that. But more often than not, the star of the show is the effects and how gory and over the top it can get, and those particular artists that bring that to life. And so, and the directors that kind of decide, like, and the editors that kind of decide, like, what we see, what we don't see, how much is in our faces, how much is pulled back a little bit, when do we just go completely all in, just take the kitchen sink approach and just go all in, especially during, like, the third act of movies like these. And, yeah, I can't think of a more fun, gory experience than watching especially these two movies back to back. So, like, when you look at Re-Animator, I remember the first time I heard about Re-Animator was, of all places, in the reference in American Beauty, when Kevin Spacey and Wes Bentley are getting high outside the restaurant, and Spacey's explaining the scene where Dr. Hill's head is down between Barbara Crampton's legs, and Wes Bentley says, "Oh yeah, that was Re-Animator." When I first saw American Beauty and I heard that conversation, I did not at all think that was a real movie. Because, because like that just, if you have no idea, that does not sound like it could possibly be. I also saw American Beauty at probably a weirdly young age. I was probably like 13 or 14 or something. But I remember it was like, there's just no way a movie like that would exist. There's not a movie where a scene like that exists, unless it's some weird underground thing or something. But no, not only is it in a movie that exists, it's in a pretty great movie, and a movie that has a pretty long-lasting and respected legacy, which is incredible, and I love that so much. And it's also funny because when they're sort of hiding the fact that Wes Bentley's selling him drugs in American Beauty, they cover that up by Spacey coming over supposedly to borrow Re-Animator from him. And it just so happens that the first time I saw this movie, it was, in fact, a DVD that was borrowed by a friend. There was no drug exchange. It was strictly an actual exchange of a Re-Animator DVD. And yeah, just right away, because I think even when I saw it the first time, I was at an age where I was still a little bit squeamish when it came to gory movies, but it's just something about this movie. Like I said, even if you're somebody that's squeamish to gore, there's just something so exhilarating about this movie. And maybe it's, the story and the characters, and it's the incredible pacing. It feels like it's 30 minutes long when it's nearly an hour and a half. Or at least this cut is, the unrated cut. But there's just so much richness in this experience. And so much of that comes from, I wasn't even aware you could do this in a movie. I wasn't aware people were capable of creating something like this, that looked like this, and that you can actually show in a movie. That's insane. Like, it defies logic in such an incredible and surreal way. It's a movie that you are glued to the entire time it's on. And even not just, I think some of the magic also comes to the fact that not even necessarily just the gory aspect of it. It's like, bizarre scenes that are now incredibly famous, like when he's disrupting Dr. Hill's class, when Herbert's disrupting the class by breaking the pencils. It's just such a it's just such a bizarre way to do that. Like there's all these different ways this scene could play out in a much more conventional fashion. But to just have West silently and intensely breaking pencils, not saying anything, is just one of those choices that just and it's like one of the starting points of this movie also that puts you in that mood of this one's gonna kind of I think my mind needs to go to a different place for this movie is what it tells you pretty quickly, and that pays off quite. It actually starts off so it does not waste time at all. There's no like opening logos or anything like that. It just starts, and right away we're seeing like the exploding eyes and stuff like that, and then we get that very much knockoff Psycho theme that kind of serves as the movie's theme. That's still it's such a lift from Hitchcock. It's shocking that it's not initially from a De Palma movie, because it's just that is so clearly what that is. It's not even hiding the fact that that's exactly what that is. That is literally the Psycho theme with a few notes thrown out of whack, and we love it, and it's great. I have no issues with that. Interestingly enough, in any other movie, I'd be saying like, "Oh my God, that's embarrassing! What a clear ripoff that is." But no, just this whole movie has its own vibe going on already. It eventually just becomes Re-Animator's theme, and you're able to separate it as this movie just becomes its own monster entirely. Um, and they even got to the name Hans Gruber 3 years before Die Hard did. There's like it's really all these things can make you think of other things, but this always brings itself back to what it is in itself, and you only associate it with it. In a time also where things can be really derivative, and that can be something that's always distracting. This is always maybe giving you echoes a little bit of something else, but then just turns right around and does something that's like, oh no, this movie is its own damn thing. I guess even when I've kind of heard that about the source material also, where it's like, yeah, it's Lovecraft's material, but it also morphs itself enough into its own thing that it's able to separate itself from the source material, but still have completely its own identity. That's something that I've heard, I would not be surprised at all if that is the case. So, another thing that I feel like we just need to praise while we're here is Jeffrey Combs, who is one of the most praisable actors in this genre. We did, last year, around this time, we did a live chat about The Frighteners. And I feel like I talked for like 20 minutes just about Jeffrey Combs and how much I love him. And what I especially love about him, what I loved about him in something like The Frighteners, and what I love about him in these, is that there's always a particular vibe he's able to find that is very, very hard to pull off. And the fact that he can pull it off as flawlessly as he does every time plays a massive factor in how movies like this work. Like, you can have all the gore and stuff like that in the camp factor, but if you had, like, somebody playing Herbert West that didn't know the very fine lines to walk, that could have been something that maybe threw things out of whack a little bit. But he's just so pitch perfect in how he's able to do, like, extreme camp, but he plays it seriously enough, but also knowingly enough that it never falls into like parody. Like it's this very close line where like parody is right here, and there's like it's like fishing line right here, and you would fall into parody, and he never crosses that line. He's always right on it and never goes over, and that's something that's so valuable when portraying these movies in the tone that they need to be in to be successful in what they're doing. And just that intensity that he has that goes away at the most interesting times. Where like when Wes is just doing like mundane things, when he's just like walking around or just being a person, he just has this really intense quality to him. But then when you get to moments when like all hell is breaking loose, and he just like appears behind Dan and is like, "Hey Dan, look out!" He's like so incredibly calm. He's like the most calm person in the movie at the most shit hitting the fan moments. And that kind of balance is something that not just any actor, I think, can pull off. It's something Jeffrey Combs has something really special that's very specific to the genre itself and the projects that he's in and the characters that he plays. And I could just go on and on about that. But also talking about the gore kind of ramping itself up, because I had talked about how, like, it starts with like the exploding eyes and stuff like that. But even like these, what's interesting about gory movies like this is there's times where, if especially if you're watching it with like a crowd or like a group of friends or something, there could be like gore and blood and guts and insides and stuff all over, just blowing all over the place, and it could get like not a reaction out of anybody, and then like the smallest little thing, like just like what like the Achilles tendon scene in Pet Sematary comes to mind, where it's like you can have plenty of gore in a movie, but all it takes is just like one little very specific thing, and you can make an entire room freak out. So I love the balance here. We do get the big stuff, but we also get stuff like the Q-tip going into the tiny hole in the head is something that's just so it's so small, especially in comparison to everything else that's going on in this. Eventually, stuff like that can have just as much of appreciation as when we're getting into like the really sort of big stuff, because it's also like, it doesn't feel, given the story that's actually going on here, a lot of the gore in Re-Animator doesn't feel like gratuitous. Like, it all kind of has context. That's something else that feels sort of unique with this particular movie, and how you look at the way it sort of escalates into everything that goes on. And so, and like I said, still walking that line, like the moment when he brings the cat back, speaking of Pet Sematary, a black cat is resurrected in this and is much more feral when it comes back. And this moment when Dan walks in and West has this cat like attached to his back, and it's like this whole attack sequence that is something like it's right out of a parody, but also at the same time, this is when we're like really learning what West is capable of, because he's already got weird vibes because we saw the cat in his refrigerator. And it's like, oh, this guy might be a serial killer, okay. And then the movie makes this turning point when the cat comes back to life, and it's this moment that's this very simultaneous moment of, this is something totally out of it. This is something out of like Scary Movie or something. And the other side of it is, oh, we're bringing the dead back to life. This is kind of this is the direction this story is going. And when you find that balance together for those feelings to happen at the same time, is how you get something like this. Something that, once again, like I said, what Combs' performance is doing, and how all of these things sort of mirror each other tonally, is this perfect sort of formula you have to reach. And everything is just working together. Even just some visuals, like the visual itself of the glowing green liquid in the syringe, especially the very last shot of the movie where everything goes to black except for that as it's being injected, are just these things that really stand out. Like, when you think Re-Animator, I'm assuming, I don't know about the rest of you, literally, this may also have to do, I think the DVD case I borrowed from my friend was green, which may be another reason, on top of the liquid, I'm saying that if you say the title Re-Animator to me, I feel like the first thing I literally think of is just the color green. Like, even before a scene in the movie. That's really interesting and really says something about what it's doing visually and with its choice in color and stuff like that. And then, yeah, you've got stuff about the creep factor. How, like, the character of Dr. Hill, for instance, where he's essentially our antagonist, I guess you could say. There's a lot of antagonizing going on here, but the idea that before he is a living severed head and a living headless body walking around together, he's already the creepiest character in the movie. And this is like after we've been raising the dead and everything, and raising cats as well. And this is another one where it's just like there's so much comedy in this, and it's like whether it be like the way he has to sneak past the guard with the fake head, something else that's also just like a perfect balance where this is just totally a comedic scene, but there's just still something so startling about that image. And the fact that it's so startling makes it even funnier. Like there's like by the time this movie is reaching its third act and everything is going down, you're laughing because it's genuinely funny, but you're also just laughing at the sheer insanity of everything that's going on. And like I said, and prior to this movie, it's hard to come across a movie that reached sort of this level of insanity as successfully as this one does, in a way that it's accomplishing exactly what it set out to accomplish. And it's just so satisfying, especially with the way we go back to like creepy scenes, like when he like like the moment with where I think it's after he's carrying his head around, and there's this moment where he's like at the window with the dean, and there's just something so creepy about the image. But then for every one of those, there's something that's just so unexpectedly and also totally expectedly hilarious about the whole thing and absurd about the whole thing. And the fact that the movie knows exactly which tone to have when, and when to just blend them all together and let the insanity reign over the movie is just so... We'll come back to satisfying. It's such a satisfying experience for a horror fan and for a fan of movies like this that are going all in on their gore and just having so much fun with it, while also having such an artistry to how all of this was brought to life, and the creativity and the where do you even come up with this imagery. And it's and like again when we get to the moment with Barbara Crampton on the table, and it basically reaches the peak of its crazy. A scene, like I said, I heard described in another movie, and I automatically assumed that that movie could not exist because that sounded too crazy. And here it is. The scene exists, and it might even be crazier than you would imagine if somebody described it to you. Like, seeing it... This is one of those cases where seeing it and hearing about it are two different experiences. When you're like, oh, so somebody did make that. Okay, that's wild. And then when you see it, it's like, I can't believe this exists. I'm looking at it right now. I still can't believe somebody made this, and it's in a movie that's actually this good. and it's yeah, I love. And then that's when like all the corpses are reanimating, and like insides are attacking and strangling people, and it's just and like these little moments that you catch after the fact, like the fact that I think it's Dan has a Talking Heads poster. It's a Stop Making Sense poster, but it's Talking Heads foreshadowing. It's all just it's so clearly in such good fun, and it's all just it's a horror fan's wet dream. This movie is, and there's a reason it has the reputation that it does. And I'm so glad that it's not one of those movies that's like underrated or under the radar. Like if you meet a diehard horror fan, any diehard horror fan, you guys could probably talk about Re-Animator for hours by itself. And it's just that has that beloved quality to it in the right circles. So that's I just love this movie so much. I could just go on. So to talk about From Beyond, yeah, it speaks volumes about Re-Animator, because when you go to From Beyond and you watch it, because the first time I saw From Beyond, I hadn't seen Re-Animator in a while, so it was kind of out of my head a little. Like you never forget Re-Animator, you never ever forget it, but it had been long enough that I needed my memory refreshed on a lot of it. So From Beyond was kind of like its own experience the first time I saw it, and it felt absolutely fucking nuts. Pretty much similar to the feeling of when I saw Re-Animator. Not to the... I don't think it's as good of a movie, like as satisfying on all the levels that Re-Animator is, but particularly as like an effects extravaganza. I remember walking away from Beyond very satisfied. and it being exactly what I needed it to be when I came out of it. But what's so interesting about that is From Beyond seems so wild and so disgusting and so unthinkable and so insane by itself, but when paired with Re-Animator, From Beyond almost feels smaller, almost feels tamer, almost like it's a little less crazy. I don't know, because there's it From Beyond eventually goes big. It actually, I guess you could say, really, it kind of goes big a little early. That first run-in, after Pretorius comes out of it for the first time, and we see him in his first sort of deformed way, and he pulls his face off and makes Ken Foree puke and all that. And the way, like, that explosion of him, and it's like, it definitely feels like From Beyond is always going big once it kicks off, once they get back to the house. But yeah, but it also feels like the perfect sort of, and I mean this in the most affectionate way, because we were talking about the sort of like old-fashioned drive-in setup, where you had the first movie and then you had the B movie, like the B side, like if you want to think of it as like an old album or something, or an old record, and how From Beyond is like the perfect B side to Re-Animator, and like I said, I mean that in the most affectionate way possible. So when you look at it that way, and you see, even when it starts, even before we've gotten to all that stuff, it feels like we're dropped right in the middle of something. Where I talked about how Re-Animator starts just right away. From Beyond does that same thing, where it does feel like it's very disorienting when From Beyond starts. Because you've got the resonator there, but we don't really know what it is or what it's doing. And we see what's going on with Pretorius, and we can see Crawford there, and it's like we don't really know exactly there's this chaotic enough nature of what's going on, and then the outcome of Pretorius being decapitated, but it's not particularly gory, and there's the creature that was floating above and then attached itself to Crawford's face, and you can see where it goes from like this sort of distant effect that doesn't feel quite as practical, and then suddenly there's a fully practical thing attached to Jeffrey Combs' face, and then this is the movie that we want it to be just right away. And like I said, it's really disorienting when you don't know what's going on here. But this is one where it feels like it's only so important what's going on in From Beyond, I think, because there's definitely like a philosophical thing going on here. I don't know if that's explored more in the source material. I would assume it is, but I do feel like it's something that's really, it's not as present in the movie as it could be, and I suppose the movie could be a little richer if it did sort of expand on that a little bit, even though I feel like the point of it also is this just kind of the abstract nature of what this machine is and what it's doing. Like it's clear what its purpose is, but as far as like delving more into it, rather than it just kind of us having sort of this surface level understanding of what the machine does, all it really is just sort of pointing us in the direction of this is the setup to get us to the effects and the gore extravaganza of what this movie is. And when we've still got Jeffrey Combs here walking that perfect line, he is the only actor, I'm convinced he is the only actor that could look into the camera the way he looks into the camera and say, it bit his head off like a gingerbread man, as dramatically as he says it. He says that like it's the most dramatic piece of Shakespearean dialogue that's ever been in his mouth, and he does it completely convincingly. And so, once again, setting the tone very early. But then again, if you're coming right in after Re-Animator, which I believe is how they released, you already have an idea of what, like, the tone has already been set if you have seen Gordon's previous movie, and you're ready to just sort of continue that experience as you go into From Beyond. And just looking at it from that way by itself, with no other factors really playing into, like kind of enriching the movie's quality outside of its effects, it's still a very satisfying experience. And I especially love the moment after we've had that first moment when all three of them witness Pretorius's first return, and all of that goes down, and then you have Combs, Crampton, and Ken Foree at like the kitchen table, and Ken Foree is just so repulsed and disgusted, and it's like, how can you possibly eat after seeing this? And he literally just puked right before this happened, and Combs and Crampton are pretty excited. Crampton's especially getting very, very passionate about this. And, they're talking about eating and having dinner and stuff like that. And that reminds me of horror fans and non-horror fans watching a movie like this. Where you have somebody who's really amped up and passionate, and the other person going, how can you be getting any enjoyment out of this? It feels like almost such an allegory for the people who are watching this movie, probably at that very moment. And that's... And that idea also of when we first see that sort of first grotesque change, and it's like, this is okay, we're getting into the fun stuff now. But what I was talking about with those little things, like the Q-tip in the forehead in Re-Animator, for me, when Pretorius first comes back, it's the elongating of the fingers is when it's like, oh god, what the fuck is that? Like, of all the other gory stuff that happens in this moment, I love when it's those things, or when, like, the third eye, the whole all the forehead stuff in From Beyond is revolting in the best way, revolting in the way we want it to be revolting, and so, and that's, and like I said, the fact that the character's excitement about it, Crampton's character in particular, becomes contagious to the audience as it really starts to ramp up as it goes. Because this is one where, like, once it starts ramping up, that's what the whole experience of the movie is, it feels like. So when we get stuff like, when Pretorius is saying, like, he's gonna kiss Crampton, and he does the whole face morph, and he's starting to try to take her brain, and the moment when, Carolyn Purdy Gordon, who is the wife of Stuart Gordon, gets her brain sucked out through her eye. And she's, it's always fun to see, this will probably sound bad, but hear me out the whole way. It's always fun for me to see Carolyn Purdy Gordon have bad things happen to her character, because, like in any movie, because I hated her character so passionately in Dolls, which was Gordon's next movie after this. Her character is so hated. Like, any bad thing that happens to her character in any other movie, I say is karma for how much of a piece of shit her character in Dolls was. So it's always satisfying to see that. Nothing against the actress, of course. Strictly that character in Dolls, who I still hold a grudge against to this day, because I hated that character so much. And so even in, like, preemptively before Dolls even releases, something like that happening to her character, the way she's, like, those kind of disturbing death groans that are also kind of cheesy in their own way, as she's literally having her brain sucked out through her eye by Jeffrey Combs, is a sight you can only see in the Stuart Gordon world, which is fantastic. Ken Foree's death scene, too, where he's just eaten down to the bone, kind of unexpectedly. I feel like it's kind of surprising how early his character is killed off, and I feel like he's a character that's likable enough and is a sort of balance to the other two characters that it kind of would have been nice to see his character go all the way and to see that dynamic between the three of them the whole way. So it's always kind of bummed me out that he dies as early as he does. But it also works as kind of a sort of surprise factor that he does go out that early, and in the fashion that he does, with just the, like I said, you can see, like, how everything down here is gone. It's the skeletal arms still barely moving that fucks me up whenever I see it. But I love it. I really love it. So, yeah, it's one of those movies where it's like, I could see it being dismissed as, like, it's nothing more than an effects reel or anything like that, but like I was saying, especially if you're going to pair it up with, like, Re-Animator, it feels like a really complete experience, and you're just watching a bunch of people that are really passionate about this genre and this material. Everybody's just in their wheelhouse making this movie come to life, and it's just, you can just sense that everybody was doing what they loved while they were making this movie, and it's one of those that just exudes that kind of positive energy. The grosser it gets, the more those positive vibes from behind the scenes feel like they're coming out. And that's just a really special feeling when a horror fan gets to watch something that clearly has so much love and passion in it from the people that made it. And that's what you get with stuff like this that's just really going all out, effects-wise especially. in saying, like, how far can we push an audience's sort of weird desire for this. And that kind of plays into the story also, where it's like the way where the resonator is sort of like amplifying these particular feelings, like especially like the sex drive, and the fact that that's like the sex drive in particular is such like a primal desire, and then when you add that factor into how this machine is affecting the characters in the movie, there is something that's really like pushing even more. Like that's a moment where you can say like it's kind of we've gone a little past the gore just being the sole factor here, and that there's multiple factors at work that make it feel like everything's becoming heightened as we get closer to a third act, and so that's yeah, and I'm dancing around the fact that Crampton just looks really, really good. in one particular scene especially, Crampton looks really, really good. So I'm just... There you go. That's out there. So, and that's really... And I think the thing also is when you look at the climax of Re-Animator and you see that it's like all the different reanimated corpses and like it's just so chaotic and hectic. The fact that really at the end of the day, when we get to the From Beyond's climax, it's basically like one creature. It's just like the Pretorius creature, but it feels just as hectic and chaotic as the climax of Re-Animator, with just like basically one creature there. Especially when Crawford gets devoured, and then it kind of becomes this sort of joint creature, and that's where I mean. Like, I'm not familiar with Lovecraft's source material, but I am aware of stuff like Color Out of Space is something that I'm familiar with, and the idea of people being like fused together is something that's typically like the sort of ultimate Lovecraftian thing, and so you can kind of see that at work here also, especially when it's eventually like the two heads that are like skulls on the ends of worms. These images that you can't even really describe, which is also just the fun of these movies, of seeing like even if you wanted to like if somebody saw this in '86 and then went back and tried to tell a friend about it in detail, they wouldn't be able to describe it in enough detail to give the friend the full description. They'd have to see it for themselves, and that when you can create something like that physically that's actually there and existing on a movie set, that's pretty magical. So that's another reason to just love these. And it's not even done when she jumps out the window to escape, and just when you think it's reached its full craziness. Just for good measure, that effect where her leg is fucked up is maybe the most gruesome thing in the movie. And it's the very end, like when her knee's just completely fucked, and like all the creature stuff, and all the gore, and all the insides, and all the bones, and matter, and whatever else, brains, everything we've seen, it's like, oh no, I didn't need to see the fucked up leg. No, it's like all that stuff is a lot of fun. That's not even fun. That's just, but it's good. I appreciate all of it. And then yeah, just ending on her descending into that laugh of madness is just the perfect way to go out, especially after you've watched the two together. So watching these two together as a double feature is an experience I can't recommend enough. But I'm assuming if you know about them enough to have clicked on a video like this, you've probably done this double feature before, maybe many times, and you know, hopefully, what I'm talking about. So that's how I feel about these. So the next thing is probably going to be another straight-to-video thing. There's also one... We are going to do a more traditional versus pretty soon after this as well. So we still got plenty of stuff coming. We're at the halfway point of the month, pretty much. So we're just going to go from there and continue what we've been doing, and then we'll see where else we end up. So until the next thing, I think that's it.